let's kick this thing off. Today we're redoing just a really great talk from Ben, hijacking screenreaders with CSS. This has been I really enjoyed it. I think you said it was like 2 months ago that we did this, Ben?
Yeah, sometime last November.
Nice. And I forgot to hit the record button. No, I hit the record button. I just didn't have the audio linked up. This time we've fixed all that. I'm recording the audio twice now. So we're hoping that at the end of this, we have a really nice video that we can share with people. But then, yeah, that kind of plays into kind of etiquette for this talk. Because it's not really like a mob programming thing, we're going to try to give Ben as much space as possible. If you have something you think is really critically important to what he's trying to say that he might have missed, feel free to unmute yourself. Otherwise, just post it in the chat, and we'll kind of have moments where we can do like kind of group questions and answers throughout the presentation. So anyway, without further ado, Ben Myers, thank you for being here. Let's do this.
Howdy, howdy. Thank you, Chan. Yeah, so my name is Ben Myers. I am a front-end developer like y'all. I've got a particular passion for web accessibility. And really, I love web accessibility for so many reasons. One, it hits close to my heart. I am disabled myself, and I accessibility is hugely important to me for my needs. But also, I just genuinely believe that it's the right thing to do. And it's also, I think, in many ways, it really tickles the like technical puzzle solving parts of my brain. A lot of the stuff with like semantic markup and ARIA and that kind of stuff. Like, it's just fun to treat it as a puzzle to solve, but a puzzle that has like very real benefits for disabled people such as myself. So I really love accessibility, and I love sharing of accessibility best practices and information with people. I blog about it super occasionally at benmyers.dev. And my goal is next week I'm going to start weekly Twitch streaming about web
Ooh.
accessibility, semantic markup, progressive enhancement, and the like. And so if you want to get out ahead of that, you can go ahead and follow me at twitch.tv/someanticsdev. So I'm going to be doing that with our own Anthony as my first guest. Yeah, so that's a bit about me. Um, what we're about to present is easily like my favorite talk I've ever done. It is silly. There is hijinks. And there's also a fair amount of like browser history, web development history going on. I also love it because it tackles two topics that I think actually have a very similar reputation in the development community. And those topics are CSS and screenreaders. Um, Both of them, I think, have reputations for being very finicky, especially when it comes to cross-browser or cross-platform support. Um, and as a result, people kind of they throw up this like mental barrier as to like, oh, this is something that is going to be difficult to understand. And so, who knows what the CSS does in the end? Who knows that magic? Who knows what the screen reader is really doing, right? Like, I just, I write my code and then cross my fingers and pray to God above that it works. I feel like there's this like similar like finicky reputation here. Um, and so I super enjoy getting to see the intersection of these two things, seeing how once these things start playing together, we can truly unleash the hijinks. And so I hope that y'all will join me today and have as fun a time learning these things as I have. And I guess first of all, I know we've got a few people here in the live event. And I kind of want to encourage y'all to maybe unmute yourself and talk to me a bit about what your comfort level is with screen reader testing. Is something you've done before? Is this something you have limited experience with? Do you feel comfortable with it? Go ahead and just kind of tell me a bit about y'all's experience with screen reader testing.
Hi there, Makar here. I have never actually done screen reading tests, but I've always felt my duty to do my best to make sure my front-end code is accessible for everyone.
Makar, your mic is kind of wavering in and out, but it sounds and it looks like Jacob's mic is acting up as well. Um, but it sounds to me like yeah, I don't have a whole bunch of experience with screen reader testing. Chan, what about you? What's
Yeah.
your comfort level here?
So my comfort level personally is um I am very comfortable with semantic markup, which I know isn't always always like a complete solution. I think that it gets you like a good amount of the way, but with a lot of the more advanced stuff that we do with both CSS and JavaScript, I'm not totally comfortable with kind of how those things like interplay, like what I'm losing sometimes by doing certain things, or like the JavaScript what I need to do in JavaScript to compensate for something that I might be doing that's not semantic. So I'd say that's probably the zone that I live in most days. I do a lot of, ARIA dash Googling.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a pretty familiar experience for a lot of people in web development. If you have some like familiarity with accessibility, like that's probably the comfort level that a lot of people sit at. So thank y'all for sharing. So yeah, I'm gonna today I'm gonna have a few demos. Um, a bit of a disclaimer. Chan and I were on the call, testing things out, and it doesn't look like Discord is actually going to share my screen audio, um, which is a shame because I have a few screen reader, specifically voiceover demos. So I'll try to do my best to like just repeat whatever is said. But you should also know that I have over on the Lunch Dev community calendar the this event has a whole bunch of links to where you can learn more, and also links where you can play with the demo sites that I've built. You can play with those yourself. You can use them as like just kind of demo ground for testing the screener, so that you can experience this for yourself because it is just tons of fun. It's sheer chaos, and I love it. Okay, real quickly, I want to talk through what our plan is for this talk. Kind of give you an overarching roadmap for where we're headed. Um, First of all, I would like to spend some time bending your brains. I'm going to present you with some of the mental models that I built up and I first web developed. And I'm going to show you the demonstrations, the demos, the examples that just utterly warped those mental models that I had, warped my understanding for how any of this worked. And after I've just like shattered your faith in web development, I want to dive deeper. I want to start looking into like how the browser and the operating system and how all this stuff actually like plays together, what it's actually doing for us. Really try to understand. Use this as a like use these few weird edge cases as an example to really truly just understand the big picture. And then afterwards we're going to talk a bit about life lessons, like what this stuff really means for us as web developers on a daily basis. So yeah, I that's my plan for today, and I'm excited. I am so excited that y'all have decided to come join me for this. Um, cool. So let's start with let's start with those mental models. When I was learning web development, it was in school, and it dealt with very much so your basic like HTML, CSS, JavaScript. One of the things that was super instilled in me early on was this idea of the separation of content from presentation. And very likely this is something that y'all have heard a lot about as well. We have our content, and that's defined in the HTML. HTML is solidly the land of structure and meanings and content semantics. This is solidly the purview of our HTML. And then we have our CSS. Our CSS is, that's our presentation. It's the appearance of things. It's what makes things look pretty, right? And if this is what you've been instilled in over many months or years, the mental model that you build up might be very similar to the one I built up, which is that CSS isn't content. CSS is totally the presentation. HTML is totally the content, right? This was the mental model I had built up. CSS is not content. When I started working full time, I started learning about web accessibility, and I started playing with screen readers. And for me, the interpretation of screen readers that felt very intuitive was that screen readers were like pure content. It was all about the content and nothing else, right? So you know, screen readers don't care about presentation. Screen readers don't care if your text is bold or if it's red or if it's upside down, right? Screen readers don't care about this because they're like pure content. Um, so yeah, CSS is content, so screen readers don't care about it. This was the mental model I had built up, and I'm willing to wager that it's probably pretty similar to mental models you've built up. Even if you haven't like explicitly put it into words like this, this probably feels at least somewhat familiar. Familiar. I'd be curious to hear what kind of your all's thoughts are on this mental model that I had built up. See if this is something that feels familiar for y'all as well.
Yeah, 100% to me. Like that makes total sense. Like this idea of, we have the content, HTML, whatever, and then we just kind of style it for the visual experience. But like really the screen reader, the audio experience should be like untouched.
Same here. I never questioned that. But I think part of what has to do with this mental model is the other issue, a relatively bigger issue we had to solve for years, which was to ensure compatibility with older web browsers like Internet Explorer, where you had this issue of at least if your CSS was off, your HTML should give some content to the user. So I guess there is also this mixing of compatibility with older browsers with accessibility.
Absolutely. All right, and it looks like Jacob's typing, so I'll give him some time to type. But yeah, this was the mental model I had built up, the intuition I had built up, and I think like when you look at these pieces, like these practices that we talk about, like separating content from presentation, and also just kind of the history of like HTML, like HTML5 deprecated so many presentational tags because HTML wanted to be like solidly about content, right? Like HTML5 solidly relegated the job of presentation to CSS. And so just in general, it seems like there would be a lot of evidence for a mental model like this. Um, I'm going to move on to the next slide, but Jacob, feel free to keep typing. How long has my cat been in this room? Huh. Um, I closed the door. He's been in here this whole time, and I just didn't know. I'm sorry, Tuna.
Tuna gained a
Yeah,
new
so
superpower. They can sneak through walls.
yes,
He wanted to learn
Tuna
about
is
screen
a
readers and CSS.
all right. Yeah. So Jacob's saying that this makes sense, and when he first learned about web accessibility, it blew his mind because it's something he had never thought of before. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So I'd like to now take some time showing you a few quick examples that took this mental model and just kind of warped it beyond recognition. I'm going to start off pretty small, and we're only going to get weirder from there. Just kind of escalate the weirdness with every example. Cool. So the first thing I want to show you is display none. This is something that we've all done display none before. So here I've got a code snippet with 3 paragraphs. The middle one has display none applied to it. Because I know this is coming through super quietly for y'all because unfortunately Discord won't share computer audio. But it went through the first paragraph, which said I'll be read aloud, and then it went through the third paragraph, which said I'll also be read aloud. The only difference between these paragraphs is that the second one, which was skipped, has display none. And so this is kind of weird, right? Like we've been able to use a CSS rule to get a screen reader to completely skip over a paragraph. And it turns out display none isn't the only rule that does this. In fact, quite a few rules do this as well. If you were to set visibility hidden on that paragraph, it would cause it to skip the paragraph. If you were to set width 0 and height 0 on that paragraph, it'll also skip that paragraph. I think opacity 0 also does that, though I might be mistaken there. Basically, anything you could do in CSS to hide an element from users, like visually, it's also going to prevent screen readers from announcing it as well. So we can use CSS to cause screen readers to entirely skip over content. So that's weird.
That's so.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say that's so wild that because immediately I think I was tracking with you like, hey, these things should be separate, but then just in one slide, one example, I'm like, well, maybe they shouldn't be separate, right? Like maybe they should be tied together like this. But then also, it is pretty odd.
Yeah. What's weirder, and we're gonna get into this throughout the rest of the presentation, but like this is an intentional decision that we'll see, and it kind of comes from, you can think of like, display none is, especially in the past, it was used as a super efficient way to toggle content visibility, right? And so if content is hidden from sighted users, it's really reasonable to assume that screen reader users shouldn't be able to get to it either. And so like this actually kind of makes sense. Like, way to go, browsers. This actually like seems like a really sensible thing to do here. Okay, so we can use CSS to completely remove content from screen readers. This is a thing we can do. But it's not the only thing we can do with CSS. Well, we can also inject content. Pseudo elements, famously not part of the DOM. That is like their whole point, right? Is pseudo elements are not like real elements. They're not actually content that's in the DOM. And so, if we're working off of this assumption that maybe screen readers read the DOM or something like that, you would expect that pseudo elements would never get announced, right? Because they're not in the DOM. They're not part of that information whatsoever. And so here we've got an edit button, and it's using the before pseudo selector, the before pseudo element, to add a pencil icon. And when I play this video, I know it's hard to hear, but VoiceOver said pencil edit button. And so it's announcing the pencil emoji there. It's saying pencil. So somehow, like, we're getting screen readers to announce content that only ever was added to the page via CSS. So now, like, we're not just removing content, we're adding content. Things are not looking good for the separation of content and presentation. But things can get even weirder from here. I'd like to show you, let's say we're working here on, like maybe a to-do list or something like that, and we need this add button, right? And usually when you have a button like this, here's how a screen reader is going to announce this. It just says add button. It says add button. This is totally what you'd expect, right? Add button. Pretty straightforward. But you know what? Our product owner has come back to us. Business, marketing, they've come back to us. And you know what? They need more. They need bigger. They want all caps. We've all had product owners like this, right? All caps. And so you decide, you know what? I could go into the markup and I could set it to be capital A, capital D, capital D. But you know what? This is a presentational decision, really. And so I should probably do this with CSS. And I would agree with you, right? So we could do something like this. We could set text transform uppercase on the button. And now we have our nice uppercase button, capital A, capital D, capital D. We haven't changed the markup at all. We've purely changed how it looks. And yet, when I navigate to this button in VoiceOver, specifically, I think this is VoiceOver in Safari, is this demo. VoiceOver announces ADD button. Yeah. So it turns out usually screen readers are really smart when it comes to capitalized words, right? Usually it's smart enough to know, like, hey, oh, this is just a capitalized version of a word. Pronounce it, like you would pronounce the sentence case, right? However, in this case, we actually have a bit of ambiguity because capital A, capital D is also an acronym, right? It's attention deficit disorder. So if a screen reader receives capital A, capital D, it doesn't know whether it's a capital add or it's ADD. And so in this case, its heuristics fail it, and it tries to pronounce it as an abbreviation, as ADD. But the only reason it knew that this button was capitalized was because we capitalized it in CSS. So we did some capitalization shenanigans in our CSS, and that changed how the button was pronounced. So we can add content, we can remove content, we can change how it's pronounced. Y'all, this isn't even the half of it. We can do so much more wild stuff. But at this point, I know we've seen kind of a few relatively tame examples. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are.
I have an immediate question, which is, so right now ADD is an acronym, and so it's just like you said, this is a heuristic, right? So if you put if you had plus in there, right? PLUS is probably not a common acronym that might be said from the browser, so it would say plus in that case.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and mostly I've seen this problem come up for 3-letter words. At my company, our login link is it's text transform uppercase, and whenever I navigate to it in VoiceOver, it says LOG on. So log LOG, it's another place where VoiceOver is getting tripped up. But yeah, it stands it's still true that the only reason screen readers are tripping up in this way is because somehow they're figuring out that this button is all caps, and therefore maybe it needs to apply some of its abbreviation heuristics, which is kind of wild. It doesn't feel like changing the capitalization of a thing in CSS change how it's pronounced.
So I've got a question about that. For somebody using a screen reader, does it saying each letter actually give meaning to it, clarifying that, hey, this is capitalized? Would somebody that needs a screen reader know, oh, ADD means it was capitalized?
People who use assistive technology become intimately familiar with the quirks of their assistive technology, and they kind of get used to it. So yeah, it is not a stretch at all for someone to go oh, I recognize that ADD, this is supposed to be add here. And yeah, I don't know that they, for instance, would need to know that it's capitalized, but it's also not entirely harmful. The way I think of it, because I'm sighted, right? I don't rely on a screen reader. The way I think of it is when I'm driving, I'm using my GPS. Sometimes GPS mispronounces street names, but that's fine. You live with it, right? You still kind of know what it means. And for people who use this technology day in, day out, they get used to that. So it's quirks, but it's still quirks that we should be aware of because our users will be aware of those quirks as well. So hopefully that helps answer the question somewhat.
Well, let me ask another one that maybe would clarify it more. What if the word was good morning, okay, and it's transformed into uppercase? Does a screen reader tell you that the person said good morning in capital letters or not?
Likely
I know
not.
that's just
likely.
Okay.
Great questions. Thank you, Justin. Okay. I still have a few more examples that I would love to get through, though, because it's, what we're seeing here, this is tame. We can go deeper, we can go weirder. So I have here a list, right? Because we're building a grocery list app or a to-do list app or something like that. I have here a list. It's your standard unordered list with list items. It's great. It's beautiful. And when I navigate to this list using VoiceOver, specifically, again, this is a VoiceOver with Safari demo. We're going to hear something like this. List 4 items, apples 1 of 4, bullet bananas 2 of 4, bullet cherries 3 of 4, bullet dragon fruits 4 of 4. So yeah, when I navigated to that list, it told me hey, here's a list. Here's how many items are in this list. Here's how far into the list you are. And with every item, it'll tell you for instance, bullet cherries 3 of 4. This is the default behavior in Safari. However, our designers have come back to us, and bullets are not in vogue, it turns out. Please kindly remove those bullets, you know? And so we're going to apply the list style none in CSS to our unordered list. And being dutiful accessibility testers and recognizing that CSS has some ability to trickle into how screen readers announce information, we're going to go ahead and test our list with VoiceOver. I don't know if you were able to hear that, but maybe you saw the announcement at the bottom. It just treated every item in the list as a text node. So it didn't tell us it was a list. It didn't tell us how many things were in the list. It didn't tell us how far we were into the list. It just said apples, bananas, cherries, dragon fruits. So by removing the bullets, by saying list style none, we lost a lot of that information that was provided by default. We were no longer told that was a list. We were no longer told, hey, this is an item in the list. We were no longer told how many items in the list there were or how far into the list we were. And as Chan says, this is very upsetting. Yeah, you should feel morally outraged by this, right? Like, what is going on here? But I have one more example for you. Oh, Justin's typing as well. Yeah, I have one more example for y'all, which is a table. So this is in Chrome. I'm using VoiceOver. This is actually with Chrome's default styles. So previously we've seen how we can use CSS to cause a screen reader to entirely forget about an element's semantics. And here we've got a table. Using Chrome's default styles, we don't get anything like borders or anything like that. Nothing fancy. And also, I want to draw your attention to my table semantics. There is absolutely nothing redeemable about these semantics. You would expect if we were using a table, you would likely use the full range of table semantics. So I would have a table head, a table body. I'd have table like th and stuff like that. Here, my table semantics are nothing to write home about. I have a table that has rows with tr and td cells within them. That's it. Absolutely nothing pretty here. And when I navigate using VoiceOver in Chrome to this table, here's what we're going to get.
Source official UN 1 China.
Yeah, so it went through very linearly. It started at the top left, started going right, left to right, top to bottom. It said rank, country, population, percent of world, date. However, this is a table, and people, when they reach tables, expect to be able to navigate that table in 2 dimensions, and I couldn't. I couldn't navigate in this demo. I could not navigate in 2 dimensions. I could only go forward and backwards in this predefined left to right, top to bottom format. It doesn't tell me when I'm in a new row. It doesn't really tell me that I'm in a new cell. It doesn't tell me this is a table at all. Instead, it just forces me to go through linearly as though this were a bunch of text nodes. And this is weird. This feels like the default experience here is broken. And that's certainly not something that we would expect from an experience like this. And I'm using semantics, albeit not great semantics, but like I'm using like a table element, I'm using table row, I'm using table cells. Like this should work. I'm here to tell you, friends, that we can fix this. We have the technology. Turns out all you need to do to fix this is add zebra striping. And then
within this table, press Control Option and then up arrow, down arrow, left arrow, or right arrow. Column 1 of 6, country. Column 2 of 6, row 2 of 11, China. 3 of 11, India. 1,366,700.
I'm just providing a laugh track at this point.
I appreciate it. Yeah. So yeah, we added, with nth child even, we added a background color to do some zebra striping, right? And doing that fixed our table. Now a screen reader user can navigate in 2 dimensions like they would expect to. They're being told when they're entering a new row or a new column. We didn't change anything about the markup at all. I assure you, the only thing that changed was we added zebra striping. And it worked. And I can see that Justin's shaking his head no, and rightfully so. This is outrageous. and it absolutely blows my mind. Yeah, tons of fun stuff. At this point, we've gone through all the demos I've got. I'm curious to know what y'all's thoughts are. I would love for you to express your outrage or your confusion or your other strong feelings on this matter. Yeah, so is this Chrome only, is what Justin is asking. No, it turns out this happens in Firefox. This happens in any WebKit browser like Safari. It happens everywhere. And I'm here to tell you, this isn't a bug. This is working as intended.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, so we're gonna get into this. We're gonna talk about like why this happens. But yeah, this is like I've looked and seen the source code in Chromium. I've seen the source code in Firefox. I've linked those on the events.lunch.dev site. You can see that source code. This is intentional. And I've actually looked at the like WebKit bug report where someone's like, "Hey, this is broken," and they're like, "Actually, no, it's not. This is what we want." So yeah, this is intentional behavior. And it is wild to me. Go ahead, Jan.
Oh, I was gonna say I have a question, but also I heard Makar about to chime in. Makar, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was just, I mean, the screen readers need to be fixed because they're out of logic completely. So I wonder if there is any open source project, anything going on, because like you cannot just invent a new logic for something that most developers would solve differently and would be confident that this is the solution, while it is about doing background color.
So
it's outrageous.
you've hit on something, and I'm gonna hit on this like pretty shortly, but I want to call to your attention that like you saw this and your outrage was immediately directed towards the screen reader. And I don't know that that's like a faulty assumption. I just like I want to call your attention to like just that like you said like, hey, the screen reader needs to be fixed here, right? Like the bug here is with the screen reader. And I think that's super interesting, like because I get that reaction a lot. And I just kind of wanted to draw your attention to that assumption. Yeah. So curious if y'all have any other thoughts at this point.
I do have a quick question before you move on, and I don't want to derail you, but
Yeah.
I'm curious, like from a design perspective, am I able to add the nth child rule and then have the background color be transparent so that I don't get the stylistic change of the tiger striping, but then I do get the screen reader effect?
I have not tested that, and I would be super interested to find out if you give this a try. And there's other things you could do. Like for one thing, if you use the full range of table semantics, so if you have like a table head, table body, if you have like th header rows, or like header cells, if you do that, like that will also fix it too.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
CSS isn't the only way to fix it, and it's not the way I would recommend fixing it. It's just I wanted to demonstrate that CSS can fix this, which is weird,
Fascinating.
right?
Yeah.
And at this point, you likely have, quite a few questions bubbling around, right? We started with this mental model of like, CSS isn't content, ergo screen readers don't care about it, right? And as we've seen, that's wrong, right? Like, and that mental model needs to warp a bit. It needs to bend. We need to challenge it. And so you're likely asking yourself a few questions right now. Like, for instance, wait a second. Do screen readers read CSS? Do screen readers read all of my CSS? Should I be worried that like every rule I write is potentially wrecking things for disabled users? Why? Who let this happen? Should they be fired? Who has committed this cardinal sin? Samantha are dead now. This isn't so much a question as a general mood, but it felt relevant, so I left it in. And the question that's already been raised today, which is, what are screen readers doing wrong? And so at this point, I want to take this adventure, this opportunity to dive deeper. We've seen a few examples of how CSS can hijack how a screen reader announces content. I want to talk about like why. Because part of the answer is actually going to be that this isn't really screen readers doing at all. This is actually implemented at the browser level. And it was implemented intentionally. All those things that you saw, they are intentional decisions that you can find in the browser's source code. I have seen some of the source code that does this, right? Um, and um, and I want to talk about like why that happens. Why would this ever be set up this way? And to do this, we need to go on a bit of a journey. We need to be visited by the ghost of screen readers past. So, like the first screen reader was actually built for DOS computers. You know, those text-based operating systems. And it turns out that their task was, I don't want to say it was easy, but it was relatively simple. Because in those days, everything in the computer was represented as text. And it was all stored in the text buffer. And that meant that, you know, if you had a speech synthesizer chip, you could create a screen reader by piping the text buffer to the speech synthesis chip. And while that was no easy task, it was relatively straightforward what you needed to do. Your needs were kind of cut out for you, and um, and things kind of like things worked that way for a while. But then we had a hot new fad, right? And that was the graphical user interface, and everything changed because you know we previously everything was represented as text, but now everything was graphics, and things were being painted to the screen, and we had layouts. We might have a button over here or a checkbox over here. They're all in different places, and screen readers had a much harder time because now the fundamental question is how do you make sense of a two-dimensional layout in kind of the linear speech synthesized format of a screen reader. And the first screen reader to tackle this problem, the first screen reader for GUIs was Berkeley's Outspoken. And here you can actually see a screenshot of the menu. This was back in the glory days of Mac OS's, or I guess at that time Macintosh's, you know, sleek interface. Right? Look at this sleek design. This right here is Outspoken, and Outspoken did something really interesting, which is it would intercept the Mac's low-level graphics instructions, the low-level painting. Like it would intercept those instructions. It would try to parse them. It would try to make sense of them. And the way it would do this is by like saying like, "Hey, it looks to me like you were trying to paint some text over here, and there's a rectangle around it. So I think that's probably a button. And over here, it looks like this might be a checkbox. This over here seems to be highlighted. So I'm gonna guess that it's like selected text." It was using heuristics to try to interpret low-level graphics instructions. If you're feeling a vague sense of horror, you should, because that is all very educated guesswork, and it was super error-prone, right? Um, if you miscalculated at one point, then your assumptions about the layout of the screen would snowball into bigger errors down the road. And also, it meant that people couldn't implement new kinds of UI controls because screen readers, Outspoken, wouldn't recognize those controls. And so this approach was very fallible. This approach, by the way, is called the off-screen model approach. It's named after the database that the screen reader would store its assumptions about the screen in. So screen readers would do some educated guesswork. It would store its assumptions in a database called an off-screen model. So this did not work for GUIs. But you know what? To be fair, maybe an approach like this could work for the web. After all, we have HTML pages, right? And so we could scrape the HTML and we could try to make sense of that and store our assumptions about the web page in an off-screen in an off-screen model, right? That's totally a thing we could try. And it turns out that didn't work so well either. The proof was in the pudding when HTML5 came out, because HTML5 introduced a whole bunch of new elements like header and footer, and off-screen models type screen readers would skip right over it. You've probably heard of the JAWS screen reader. JAWS just straight up ignored any element it didn't recognize, and users had to pay for a very expensive update to be able to use the web, to be able to use these new HTML5 elements, to be able to access them in their screen reader. And additionally, screen readers aren't just about um, browsers, right? They're not just about web pages. Therefore, any application the user might want to use. And you challenge that kind of like general purpose use case if you have a whole bunch of logic in there that's specifically for the web, right? Screen readers want to be much more general purpose than that. So, in general, this off screen model approach didn't work. It required a lot more perfect understanding of kind of how layouts worked, how new UI controls worked. It was susceptible to new controls, and so generally this was the thing that we learned. Um, we learned that when you try to reverse engineer meaning, it's going to be educated guesswork at best. So this was the best we had, right? Reverse engineering meaning, it just fundamentally was not going to work as an approach, and so we needed something new. Um, this is actually where your operating system steps in, because the operating system said, hang on, what if I, the operating system, Windows or Mac OS or Linux, what if I provided a common language that all applications could speak? And then assistive technology, they speak that language too. So, browsers and other applications, they could speak to me in this like language of accessibility, this common protocol that we all agree upon. And then screen readers and other assistive technologies, they can come talk to me and we could get this two-way communication. So that's this like common protocol that we've got. And so this approach is called the accessibility API. And here's the way it works. Your operating system provides what are effectively classes, right? These are primitives that describe different kinds of UI controls that an application might need to have, right? So there's a class for like a radio button. There's a class for buttons. There's a class for checkboxes. Just bundles of properties that represent an individual checkbox or list or table in an application, and describe those UI controls in terms of their functionality, right? Don't need to worry about any of the presentation, right? Nothing about the appearance, purely just describing the sheer raw functionality of these elements. And applications build up representations of their contents in terms of these objects, in terms of these classes. And what that means is, if we got like a browser with like a checkbox that has a label that says, I agree to the terms and conditions, it's using a checkbox object provided to it by the operating system. And when you've got a dialog that says, do not show this message again, and shows a checkbox, it's using the same kind of checkbox. It's using the same underlying fundamental structure provided by the operating system. So a checkbox is a checkbox, regardless of whether you're in a browser or you're in Microsoft Office or you're in an operating system dialog. It's all the common language. All applications are providing versions of themselves that speak this language, that use this protocol. And they're providing those versions, they're exposing those versions to the operating system explicitly for assistive technology like screen readers to consume. So it's a common tongue. And so here's just like generally the flow. Your browser receives some HTML. Your browser creates a DOM based on that. Your browser creates an accessibility tree. This is that representation of the page that uses the operating system constructs, right? So this is an alternate version of your DOM that's specifically built based on these operating system primitives for assistive technology users to understand. The browser then sends this accessibility tree to the operating system. Dinosaurs eat man. Screen reader consumes the accessibility tree from the operating system. So this is the general flow. This is what your browser is doing all the time. This is a part of like the DOM manipulation process. Is anytime you change the DOM, the browser is also behind the scenes updating the accessibility tree, updating its internal representation of the page, which it exposes in an accessibility friendly version or assistive technology users to consume. And it turns out this accessibility tree, this isn't like a hypothetical thing. This is actually something that you can see in your browser. So here, I'm going to pull up a very familiar page, hopefully for all of us. We're going to see that like in Chrome, we can actually open up the accessibility tree and poke around for ourselves. And so here's how we're going to do this. We're going to hit inspect element, or inspect, I guess. And then here, I'm going to click this accessibility tab that's at the bottom here. And you can see that, like, because I'm inspecting get started link, I can now see all the different properties about this link. And so we can see that, like, yeah, it's a link, it's focusable, it's currently focused. This is all the information that assistive technologies receive by the browser about our link. This is all the functionality like that we get. And so this is what the screen reader is using. It's using this information to decide how it announces your content. So that is the accessibility tree. Any questions at this point? We're kind of starting to run close on time, so might have to speed things up a bit. But you can see the accessibility in this. You can see in browser in Firefox as well, and I believe other browsers also expose it. Any questions about how any of this works?
No, I think we can also post links to because I know you have a lot more content that you want to get through, so we can post links to
Sure.
this the accessibility pane in both Chrome and Firefox. I'll collect those right now.
Sounds good. All right. So at this point, we might get this sense of like, hey, like browsers are constantly building this accessibility tree, constantly building a representation of the page in an operating system protocol that is friendly for assistive technologies to consume. But what I want to impress on y'all is that browsers actually have a great opportunity here. Browsers don't just make the accessibility tree, they curate it. Browsers have this opportunity, like they have all the information. They have the web, the HTML, they have the CSS, they have anything that anyone might need to know about this information. They have all the power here. And so they have the opportunity to curate the accessibility tree to make it slightly more usable in different ways for assistive technology users. And that's really important because they use this in super, super powerful ways. And here's where we dive into part 3, life lessons. Specifically, I want to talk to you about cow paths. These are paths that have been traveled so many times before that they just kind of become an established path, right? They become an established truth, an easier way of doing things. And once a path becomes a cow path, the easiest thing to do is just kind of like pave over it, right? Like you're not gonna get rid of it. It's not going away. It just becomes enshrined as just the truth, right? And this is what's happening here when browsers curate the accessibility tree. All of those things about how CSS is modifying our assistive technology announcements and modifying our screen reader announcements, those individual ways in which browsers are curating the accessibility tree. Browsers are saying, hey, typically when people use DisplayNone on something, they don't intend for sighted users to be able to see a thing. And therefore, this content is not meant to be accessed by anyone. So I need to take DisplayNone as a clue that I should remove this content from the accessibility tree altogether. Or, hey, users are using or developers are using pseudo elements to inject content that's not really content, but the end user doesn't care. Users, when they access our page, don't care if something's a pseudo element or not. It's content to them, right? So we need to expose it as content. This is being exposed as all uppercase. Maybe we should expose it to assistive technology users in as all uppercase just in case, because it could be a way that they're using acronyms. Or, you know, that table thing, we've all heard about layout tables, right? The pattern where people would use the table element to lay out the page and get this two-dimensional layout. It's not accessible. It's not semantic. And by now, most web developers know better. However, it still exists, right? There's still legacy unmaintained sites out there. They're still using this pattern, and screen reader users are still going to encounter those pages. And there's going to encounter those patterns. And so browsers have made the active decision that they're going to curate how tables work, how tables are announced based on certain heuristics. They're going to try to guess at whether a table is being used for layout or it's being used for data. And based on that, it's going to change how it exposes those tables to assistive technology users. That's why zebra striping changes how a table is announced, is because, browsers have figured out that if you're zebra striping a table, it's likely not being used for layout. It's likely being used to present data. So we can use that as a heuristic to know that this is probably a data table and we should expose it as such. But if it's not a data table, then it's probably a layout table. And we should not expose it as a table in that case, because that would be confusing. Actually, the same goes for like the list items as well. There was an interesting thread that you can see on the events.lunch.dev link, an interesting thread that walks through WebKit's thought process for determining that if someone removes bullets, then we shouldn't expose the thing as a list either. So all of these are intentional decisions, and this just really goes to show that we as developers are really laying these cow paths, right? We are determining these weird like the patterns we use today are the legacy patterns that browsers and other tools are going to have to work around down the road. And that's why I value semantics as much as I do. It's because I want to make sure that I'm not making the mistakes that have to be accounted for or worked around later, right? You doing things right now makes it so much easier to continue doing things right down the road. And I think that's something that we could apply to all like our day to day, every day, right? Is just do the right thing, because that makes it easier to do the right thing down the road. And another takeaway that I want y'all to get is like, hey, yeah, CSS does impact assistive technology. Make sure you're doing testing, right? Test in a wide variety of browsers, a wide variety of assistive technologies. Continuously test, because you never know when weird behavior like this might come up. Finally, I wanted to kind of show you, this is a screenshot of the actual Chromium source code. This is the method that they've got called isDataTable. And if we scroll down a bit in here, you can see that we actually have specifically a few lines of code for zebra striping. This was all intentional. And that, I think, is the kind of the most beautiful gem of all of this. I have to drop, so unfortunately I can't take any questions, but if you have any questions, please leave them in the chat. I'm happy to answer them, happy to kind of just go further in depth. I super love this subject. I think it's fun to just kind of geek out about, and I hope y'all have kind of enjoyed this foray into how your browsers are working and just kind of one of the weirder sides of web history, perhaps. Thank y'all for having me.
Ben, this has been amazing. I know that you have a meeting that you have to get to, and so go ahead and drop it. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. It's been absolutely amazing. You have such a good way of presenting this stuff. And get your meeting. We'll see you soon, and I'm sure that we'll have plenty of follow-ups.